Hey, how y'all doing? This is Mongo Slade, and today we're going to talk about the underdog story and, sort of psychology behind it and give you some examples of what a good underdog story is and what is it supposed to convey and why it's supposed to be important, why we often need these stories. But first, hit the like button for me. I appreciate you. Also, hit subscribe unless you're already subscribed, in which case, thank you for being subscribed. I appreciate all of my subscribers. Thank you kindly. Also, feel free to take the $1 challenge. In the description or in the comments, there should be a link to Cash App, which is the best way to help the show so far. Send me $1 if you appreciate everything that I do. So let's get right into it. So the underdog story uh, has universal appeal. Now, despite the fact that it has universal appeal, it is also rooted in the American dream. It is usually a rags to riches type of story. In some instances, when you're talking about economics, you also see these, and they're called Cinderella stories. If you're talking about something like March Madness or a team who gets lucky, quote unquote. But these sort of stories instill hope, you know, and I'll go into detail about these things later. It also triggers our sense of fairness and our senses of justice. But we'll get into those things in a little bit more detail later. So the universal appeal is that we often identify with underdogs. We sometimes even see ourselves as the underdog. And a bond is created between us and the underdog as we watch them struggle through whatever it is that they're going through. You watch the underdog go through something and you feel bad for them. You know, you want to see them pull themselves up. In some cases, you try to figure out in what ways you would be, how you would handle the situation. When they have, when they fall and they fail, you feel bad for them. You empathize with them. You look at their condition and you say, damn, that could be me or that was me. And that's really what the universal appeal is, that everybody goes through these things. Everybody has these stories where they, and where they look at themselves and they say, damn, that could have been me, or that was me at one point in time or something like that. Now, it instills hope because we often have this us against the world mentality. A lot of people feel like, the world is out to get them. Things aren't going their way. Things are not really working out. But, when we identify with somebody else with whom things are working out, we begin to feel that maybe things can work out for us too. It gives us a good feeling, makes us feel like the world is a better place than we think it is. That it's more just, that it's more fair than it usually normally is, but that it could be a just and fair world in some cases when it's not really. But it just gives us that temporary feeling that the world is just and fair. Now, like I said, despite the fact that it has universal appeal, which means across societies, across cultures, it is heavily rooted in the American dream. Because the American story is all about scaling the economic and social hierarchies. Going from being a farmer to being an oil magnate. Like the old industrial era, where you'll hear all these rags to riches stories about these immigrants who came in from Ellis Island, like some of the industrial. Andrew Carnegie, was one of them. He was an industrialist from, I think, Scotland. He was a Scottish immigrant, came to the United States with little to nothing. He died with his name being scrolled across, hundreds of buildings, because his work ethic allowed him to, in the United States, as far as the country is concerned, through our Protestant work ethic of, if you have hard work, determination, a positive mental attitude, then you can make it in the United States. Regardless of your race, your creed, your religion, you can make it. That belief has been instilled in the American spirit leads people to believe that they can achieve, that you can climb these social hierarchies, that you can climb these economic hierarchies with hard work and determination alone. Through skill and ability, through proper timing, proper mental attitude, you too can make it. And, sometimes these things are called, grabbing the brass ring in WWE speak, or breaking through the glass ceiling. This is what they talk about people like minorities. Like a woman finally becomes the president of some bank or something like that. They'll say she broke through the glass ceiling. These are also Cinderella stories, the unlikely hero, all these sorts of things. They're all bound up somewhat in the American dream. Because it's all about somebody coming from nothing, growing to something, or overcoming incomparable, unrealistic odds. So the competition matters. In these situations, if you're going to identify with David, you have to know what the Goliath is. What is the Goliath in these situations? Sometimes the Goliath is, part of the Goliath is the starting point, where, yeah, in order to tell the David and Goliath story, you had the visual story of David being small, Goliath being big. You could also tell the story of David being young, Goliath being old and wily, or David being anything. You could do that metaphor all day. So what is the top dog? Is the top dog really the top dog, or how powerful is the top dog? Because if the top dog is powerful, then the story will always make sense. That the underdogs will overcome, and it will give you that hope, that genuine good feeling. But the top dog has to feel like a top dog. So in other media, you can look at number one from this is Rocky. When you look at Rocky is a quintessential masculine rags to riches story. It is a Cinderella story, and it is made even better because in Rocky 1, you are introduced to his down on his luck, sort of self-deprecating, yeoman-like boxer whose only real skill is determination and his ability to absorb damage. Rocky is not being shown as being a better fighter than Apollo Creed. He's not being shown as being he has a small sense of being a better person than Apollo Creed because he's less arrogant. He's less arrogant. He's less, over the top as far as his personality is concerned. He's more subdued. But that was the point of the story, is that you got to see Rocky being a leg breaker for the mob. You got Apollo Creed living in mansions. Rocky lives in an apartment. He has no family. Apollo Creed has a beautiful family, wife, child. Apollo, when you first meet Rocky, he doesn't even have a girlfriend. And then his girlfriend is this humble chick who works at a pet store. While, Apollo Creed's wife looks almost like a model. So they start to show you how different Creed and Rocky, Balboa, how different their lives are. And then you get to see how different they fight. What Apollo Creed fighting more of a flashy, cocky style, where you have Rocky's more of a traditional boxer, but he's a tough guy. He's not really a good boxer. Fundamentally, technically, Rocky is not good. That's really the story of the movie. Period. Is that Rocky never put forth the effort to actually be good. He was fine just making enough money to live off of. He never thought he'd be the world heavyweight champion. It seemed too far-fetched a dream or an ideal for him. But through hard work, through going out there catching the chickens and beating up the rib cage of these dead cows, he was able to find something within himself. And even though he did that, he still did not win the title, but it was still a victory. This would have made Rocky a great story. It could have been corny with Rocky going in there and knocking Apollo Creed out. They told the story better by having Apollo Creed win the match, but it could have gone either way. Because in some ways, that's more offensive to Apollo Creed. And that's what Rocky 2 is about. Rocky 2 is about how offensive it is to Apollo Creed, the best tuned athlete in the world, that some greasy nobody almost beat him and hung in there with him for all 12 rounds. That was the story. And then, of course, in Rocky 2, Rocky actually wins the fight, because he, again, puts forth this effort. And, now he has this faith in himself that he can win. And then he does. Because for most of Rocky 1, Rocky has no faith that he can win. He just wants not to be embarrassed. Rudy is a different story because it's in this situation with Rudy, you're talking about somebody with a mental health problem who is not likely to really make the team. The Notre Dame football team, and he finally does make it. These stories exist all over the place. You could find these underdog stories literally just about it. It's one of the Hollywood tropes you would see a lot is the underdog story. Another one, I should have put it here, but it's The Pursuit of Happiness, the Will Smith movie when his son was really young. I think it was Jaden. He was really really little. For people who have not seen it, The Pursuit of Happiness was a Will Smith movie that featured Will Smith playing this guy who was selling, I believe it was some sort of X-ray machine that he had bought, like 100 of these things, and now he had to go out and sell them. And they were supposed to make him rich, but they were pretty much obsolete when he bought them. So none of the hospitals that he bought needed them. So he's just basically, catching the bus with these machines, trying to sell them, and he couldn't. And he started to, lose everything. He didn't have a regular job. So he lost his wife, he lost his apartment. Him and his son was sleeping in a subway bathroom on the floor. But through grit, determination, making proper sacrifices, this guy was going to, meetings, after having taken up a painting job. You got this guy, willing to go for jobs that he's not qualified for, but willing to work and show determination and get an internship. He did all of that stuff for an internship in order to quite possibly make a lot of money. And that's part of the underdog story too, is that something that might not seem valuable to other people is incredibly valuable to you. Like all of this stuff that Will Smith's character, I don't remember the guy's real name. I don't remember, like it was based on a real story, by the way, but I don't remember the guy's name, but all the stuff that he was doing was just for an internship to get hired into this company. And not even a promise that he would get hired in, just for a foot in the door, And that's sort of similar to Rocky, where nobody expected Rocky to win. It was all about Rocky doing all of this stuff just to look competitive. And he ended up, overachieving. So in a wrestling context, you'll see that the underdog is almost always picked because they're the smaller wrestler, or they lose a lot, or, something of that nature. They're inexperienced or something to that, but they typically overcome these things by having a determination, by having heart, by having passion, having superior training, a superior mental attitude, work ethic. They're considered an overachiever. In some ways, they're not supposed to be there already. You typically see this when it comes to guys who come from the indies to the WWE. CM Punk, Daniel Bryan, Kevin Owens. They're like, I shouldn't be here. I spent 10, 15 years in the independents. It's like so that you could empathize with them and make them seem like the underdog versus the Randy Ortons and the John Cenas who literally came out of nowhere and all of a sudden were on TV making millions of dollars. And these guys were getting power drived in high school gyms and, having these Meltzer 5-star classics that nobody cared about. That's a good way of setting up underdogs. And it works. It continues to work. But let's go through some examples. I believe I have some examples ready. So Rugged Ronnie Garvin, 1987. Ronnie Garvin was a journeyman wrestler, was a mid-card performer, really had no business being in a feud with Ric Flair. Actually won the World Heavyweight Championship in 1987 from Ric Flair. If I remember correctly, he won that match with a roll-up. I think it was a sunset flip. It was a cage match. It was at a house show, I believe. But Rugged Ronnie Garvin won the World Heavyweight Championship from Ric Flair. It's a hell of a story. This is a guy who, again, never should have been anywhere near the world title, and yet was the World Heavyweight Champion. And a lot of people wish that he wasn't. And, the real story behind all this is apparently that the bookers behind Jim Crockett Promotions wanted Ric Flair to actually win the title at Starrcade, but Ric Flair was the champion. So what they decided to do was take the title off of Ric Flair, give it to somebody, anybody, just so Flair can beat them at Starrcade. And they gave it to Ronnie Garvin, because he was a guy that was a good hand that everybody kind of liked and respected, and he didn't have to be the champion that long. That's the real story. But the proper story of it is that Ronnie Garvin had no business being in the match with Ric Flair and ended up winning, becoming the world heavyweight champion. That's a hell of a story, man. Especially when you look at the history of a lot of guys who was, kind of right on the cusp of being the NWA heavyweight champion, and it never happened. Guys like Dr. Death Steve Williams, for instance, it just never happened. It's a really big deal, especially since it was kind of the late '80s, and it was a completely different world. So the number one story when you talk about underdogs is usually the 1-2-3 Kid. The 1-2-3 Kid, a undercard jobber who was known as the Kid. He changed his name 100 times: Kamikaze Kid, Cannonball Kid, Lightning Kid. He just went out there and routinely lost every match he was in. And then on May 17th, 1993, he ended up in this match with Razor Ramon. The cocky, quote unquote, Hispanic, because he was not Hispanic. And he defeated him with a moonsault. A moonsault finished, Razor Ramon. It was the pinfall heard around the world, and it set the 1-2-3 Kid's career on fire. He became, he didn't become like a superstar, but Sean Waltman does not have the lengthy, notable career that he did have without this match. And this match was a perfect setup of a David versus Goliath story, not because the Kid was so small and Razor was so big, but because the Kid was an absolute jobber, and Razor Ramon was seen as a guy who could stand toe-to-toe with Bret Hart. This is a guy who could stand. I believe, if I remember correctly, he had wrestled Bret Hart at the Royal Rumble in 1993, if I remember correctly. I believe he did. So he had wrestled Bret Hart for the title just a few months before this. So, but Razor, ended up making this guy, and it became a really big deal. And this is, a hell of a story that, and it created a hell of a moment. It's a moment that going back and watching it, it'll still give you chills. Along that same vein is Barry Horowitz. Barry Horowitz, a perennial jobber. I believe he started wrestling in WWE in 1981 for Vince Sr., if I remember correctly. He never did anything. He was still around in 1995 when the booking team randomly decided that Barry Horowitz was going to beat Skip, who was Chris Candido. And this match also, if you was to watch the last few minutes, which are up on YouTube, look at the reaction of the crowd, because Barry Horowitz never wins. He was an absolute job guy. He never won, and then out of nowhere, he beat Skip. Now, they ended up blowing the load on this thing because they had him beat Skip 2 or 3 times, and then they didn't really have anything for him other than that. So it was kind of like they built up to this moment. Then they got the moment, and then you couldn't really ride the wave. Let's put it like that. Similarly, you had Mikey Whipwreck, who was, a punching bag in ECW. There was, for a long time, Mikey Whipwreck was a guy who never had any offensive moves at all. He didn't really have any offense at all. And that's really how Paul Heyman was able to get people to identify with him and feel bad for him, is that he was a kid. If I remember correctly, Mikey was legitimately one of the youngest people on the roster. He might have been even a teenager when he first started. And, you had this guy just basically just go out there and get his ass kicked by pretty much everybody for weeks on end. And, slowly but surely you built him up. Slowly but surely he still was getting killed by different people. Even though he was winning, he still wasn't seen as being a legitimate threat. And out of nowhere, this guy started winning titles. And then he ended up being the ECW World Heavyweight Champion. And he was still an underdog because his opponent was the Sandman. The guy who was, killing everybody around this time. It was like 94, 95. Yeah, the Sandman was the man. Mikey Whipwreck was a kid who was still seen as being a punching bag. So it created for an interesting story, a hell of a story. It's not listed here, but the Terry Funk Raven story is similar, where you had Terry Funk was this late 40s. I think Terry Funk might even been in his 50s when he was 56 or something like that when he won the ECW world title from Raven. And that was a different sort of underdog story because Raven is the story was that Raven was a guy in his prime. He's at the height of his career. He's the best he's ever going to be. And Terry Funk is, almost 2 times over the hill. So how would he ever, beat Raven? And then he did. So that's another great underdog story, but I didn't think of it until right now. But, that should be on here too. Mick Foley, the story of Mick Foley, the story of mankind, is one of the greatest underdog stories in WWE history. You see this guy, he's disfigured, he's portly, he's not, the handsome guy. See, Foley is defined, in my mind now, by the Jim Ross quote when he says that Vince McMahon only hired Foley to show him what it's like for a wrestler to break his heart. That, this guy you have so much faith in is not really all that good. And it turns out that Foley is one of the best ever because he's a great character actor and that he will dig into himself and pick these scars, in some ways even legitimate scars, and tell real stories through the mankind character to how he became such a tormented soul, right? And one of my favorite quotes is, when he says, "Why didn't you take me when I was good? Why didn't you take me when I was young?" He built himself up as that Rocky Balboa, tough guy, not particularly highly skilled, not particularly good looking, not marketable, but tough beyond words. A guy who, his greatest advantage is that he can absorb a lot of damage. He doesn't care about you whacking him in the head with a chair. He don't have any photo shoots to do. And then you juxtapose that to The Rock, where The Rock is corporate. Rock is good looking. Rock is rich. Rock is young. Rock is athletic. He's handsome. He's everything Mick Foley isn't. He's the guy who should be the WWE champion. That's when you set that up, and then you have Foley go over to win the title, his first world championship anywhere. And it was an amazing story, fantastic story, and it's up there with the 1-2-3 Kid as far as underdog stories are concerned for me, especially since I was a Mick Foley fan as a kid. I was really a Mick Foley mark. I loved him. Not so much these days. I still love his work, but his politics is something desired. Also, you have Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero was a similar story. Eddie is a guy who had a lot of personal demons. You're talking about Eddie Guerrero but he also had physical limitations. Look at Eddie Guerrero in WCW. He's small. He has no muscle definition. He's what you would call a plain vanilla midget. They don't let Eddie talk. They don't let Eddie do anything. He looks like Luigi from the Mario Brothers with that goddamn mustache and that mullet. All he needed was like a hat with an L on it. And that's really all it was when it comes to Eddie Guerrero. But, we got to see Eddie Guerrero's story. We got to see Eddie Guerrero break his arm. We got to hear about Eddie Guerrero getting coffee thrown on him by Eric Bischoff. We got to see Eddie Guerrero have these problems get this DUI and have to come back from it. Get into this car wreck and come back from it. We got to hear about his drug addictions. We got to hear about the infidelity that he had, that he went through. We had to hear about all this stuff before he won the title. And then that's what the road to him becoming the champion was all about. Was about overcoming addictions, getting a second chance, and who is his Goliath? His Goliath is Brock Lesnar, the vanilla gorilla, the guy who killed Hulkamania, the guy who manhandled The Undertaker, the guy who tossed the Big Show like he was made out of, a stack of paper. That guy is Eddie Guerrero's Goliath. Eddie is everything WWE did not want. Brock is everything WWE wants. You see Eddie's passion. You see Eddie's heart. You see his determination. You can hear it in his voice. You can see it in his eyes. You can watch how he performs. Brock has a sense of entitlement. He's already been given everything, and he was very young at the time. They already gave him the whole world. He won the title 5 months being into the company. Right? So it was a perfect underdog story for Eddie Guerrero. And it was flawless, and this is what you will remember. Out of all of the things that people may say about Eddie Guerrero, you're going to remember when he pinned Brock Lesnar for the WWE Championship, and that's what you're supposed to believe. That's what you're supposed to remember. That's what you're supposed to walk away from. With the underdog story is the happily ever after. Now, unfortunately, we didn't get our happily ever after with Eddie. You never do with these underdog stories in wrestling because the story continues. In a movie, this is where the story ends. With Eddie winning the title, holding the flags in the air with the belt in one hand, the flag in another, and everything's great. Roll credits. In a movie, that's how it would end. Similarly, you have Rey Mysterio. Now, Rey Mysterio is double layered, triple layered in some cases as far as being an underdog. This guy's like 5'6". He's legitimately not 200 pounds. Even when on the gas, he was not 200 pounds. He could not make the 200-pound weight limit. Okay? He couldn't make it. But what they did through story was stack the deck against Rey Mysterio so much. And in some ways, booking him to be essentially just a crash dummy. He goes out there, gets thrown around. Every bad thing in wrestling that happens to anybody happens to Rey Mysterio because you can gain so much sympathy. And he's such a talented performer that you can do all that crazy stuff to him and he'll be okay. It's okay because it's Rey. And it shows Rey's determination. It shows his heart that he comes back from it. That he continues to fight. Even after being embarrassed. Even after being thrown around. And his road to winning the World Heavyweight Championship for the first time is a great story. Great underdog story. You got this guy, again, 5'6", 175 pounds. He enters the Royal Rumble at number 2. He's in there with legends and killers, and the last 2 people in the ring with him is Randy Orton and Randy Orton and Triple H. Randy Orton is the heir apparent to Triple H, and Triple H is beating everybody. And everybody figures Triple H is going to WrestleMania because it's already been leaked online that Triple H is going to wrestle John Cena. So everybody figures Triple H is just going to win the Royal Rumble. Nope. 5'6", 175 pound Rey Mysterio won the Royal Rumble. And then, just in case you thought that was ridiculous, which is entirely possible for people like that's ridiculous. Why would you do that? They did something that I thought at the time made no sense. But with looking back on it, I love that they did this. When they had him put his title shot on the line against Randy Orton and then lose. So then you think in your mind, Ray lost his title match. He won the Royal Rumble. He was almost there. And then they yanked it away from him and gave it to their favorite son, the guy who was, bullying women and all this type of stuff, Randy Orton. And then through some fairy dust, Teddy Long sprinkled some fairy dust, and Rey Mysterio got back into the match at WrestleMania, but it was a triple threat match. Now he doesn't have to just beat Kurt Angle. He has to beat Kurt Angle and Randy Orton. And then Rey Mysterio does it. He was given the opportunity, and he went out there and he did it. It's a hell of a story. It's a hell of a story. Now, again, after, the pinfall, he holds the title in the air. You see his kids clapping. Roll credits. Can't get better than this. And Rey Mysterio is one of these guys, man, that no matter how many, when you look at his accolades and all the stuff that he's achieved, he still manages to be an underdog in every situation he's in because he has that natural size disadvantage. He's always going to be smaller than everybody he's working with. So it never fails. And Daniel Bryan is probably going to be my last example because when you look at Daniel Bryan, you're looking at a guy who was struggling to find an identity in WWE. You're talking about a guy who, yeah, he had been the world heavyweight champion, but he was sort of the workhorse champion. He was sort of a joke. He was doing comedy stuff and, he was running away from Big Show and Mark Henry. He was doing a lot of comedy around this time. He wasn't being taken serious. And then he entered this feud with John Cena, where it wasn't really even a feud, where it was basically John Cena said, you deserve a title match. The crowd agrees you deserve a title match. You get a title match. And then Daniel Bryan started making it about respect. And then you start saying about Daniel Bryan's heart, his determination, his passion for the business, how much he loved the business, and to do this, he had to denigrate John Cena, who is, of course, like I said, he's the Goliath in this situation. Where previously when we talked about Rey Mysterio, he had to wrestle an Olympic gold medalist and one of WWE's favorite sons in Randy Orton in order to become the world heavyweight champion. Daniel Bryan had to be the golden goose, okay? The top guy of the last 20 some odd years. He had to beat this guy. And Daniel Bryan is also 5'8". So he's also undersized because he's like 5'8", 180. Right? He's also sort of in that cruiserweight weight range. He's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have the look that WWE wants. He's sort of a mixture of the Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Mankind, Mick Foley situation. That's sort of all came together with Daniel Bryan. And Daniel Bryan goes out there, beats John Cena clean. Now, in some of these other situations, if you've been paying attention, Eddie Guerrero didn't win his match clean. Mick Foley didn't win his match clean. It was a triple threat match with Ray. So, that's as clean as you're going to get by having pinning one of the people in the match. But Daniel Bryan won this match clean. Right? He toppled the beast with nothing but his own determination and skill. That's fantastic storytelling. And of course, it set up the whole feud with the Authority, where they kept this thing going, where they knew what they had as far as Daniel Bryan being an underdog is concerned. So they started calling him a B+ player. And I noticed that a lot of people online kind of took that so seriously. Like, Triple H is the real B+ player. What are they talking about? He never did anything. He's the guy in the main event with the guy. And I was like, dude, it's a storyline. Relax. They're telling a story here that Randy Orton is the A+ player. He's the top guy. He's the good looking, young, handsome, big, tall, everything that WWE wants. Daniel Bryan is a garden gnome. Who the hell would want that guy to be their world champion? And it was basically keep away from Daniel Bryan. But it worked so well that, WWE couldn't take him out of the title picture when they wanted to. Like, it was only supposed to be temporary. But, they couldn't take him out of the title picture because it worked so well. When you see Triple H and Randy Orton and Stephanie McMahon and all these people that at the time everybody hates standing against this one guy, he got, this relationship with the audience. We empathize with him to such a degree after watching him get screwed by Randy Orton that we wanted him to have that ultimate comeuppance. And eventually we got there with him defeating Evolution in one night. He defeated Triple H, Batista, and Randy Orton all in one night to become the WWE World Heavyweight Champion. Roll credits. And of course they didn't roll the credits because we empathize with him more because Daniel Bryan ended up losing his dream. Because he got all these concussions and various injuries that took him out of action for a while. But Daniel Bryan was legit one of the last great underdog stories of pro wrestling. It was amazing. And he's still riding off that wave today. So this wasn't meant to be an exhaustive list. I'm sure that you guys can think of your own underdog stories if you sit down and really think about it. please leave those in the comment section below. I'm pretty sure there's some things, especially from other companies, that I'm not thinking about. You know, there's definitely some really good underdog stories that I'm not considering, uh, that maybe happened in places I didn't see or I haven't seen yet, because I have not watched everything that is on the network yet. So I'm pretty sure you guys have some ideas of your own. The underdog stories are best when the deck is stacked against the underdog. You know, it's good when it's one on one, but it's better when it's one on many. You know, the Daniel Bryan story was only able to work because there were so many missing. There were so many pieces involved. Because Randy Orton is enough of a problem. You know, John Cena was enough, right? John Cena is a big enough mountain to climb. And then Triple H turns heel. And then Randy Orton's involved. And then Stephanie McMahon's involved. So you have all these people with all this power, all this prestige, all this ability stacked against one Daniel Bryan. So he climbed one big mountain only to find out that there's a triple big mountain on the other side. You know, Rey Mysterio was another one. He climbed this huge mountain of the Royal Rumble only to slip, fall down, and then find out that he has to climb this mountain and another one. You know, like, you stack the deck, you'll get the desired result. But of course, you can't do it to too much of a degree, because then it becomes so obvious that the person is going to win once they get the opportunity. Kofi Kingston was kind of like that. That was the only thing about Kofi Mania I didn't really care for. It's like everybody knew he was going to win. You know, it was no question that if Kofi versus Daniel Bryan was going to happen, Kofi was going to win. As great as the match as it was, great as the moment was, there is something to be said about it being very predictable that he was going to win the match. You know, and that's unfortunate. Another final thought is that the mystique of the underdog is actually quite fragile. Once you get a lot of frequent success, you cease to be an underdog. You know, it's kind of like Daniel Bryan really should have lost his underdog status by now, because he's won because he won every title. Rey Mysterio should have lost his underdog status years ago. But they find new ways of making Rey an underdog, you know? And it usually, sometimes when it breaks and the person is no longer an underdog, you really have nowhere for them to go. Mikey Whipwreck was one of those situations. Like, once he's become the heavyweight champion or whatever, what do? You know, you can't keep telling people like, oh, this kid, he's in over his head. It's like he was the world champion. You can't just keep saying he was in over his head. You know, like, you can't keep pulling that card. And it's you know, when does the little engine that could become, you know, a regular train that runs properly and does everything that a train is supposed to do? You know, it's hard to tell. But these things are very fragile. Sometimes people are, you know, buy into the whole underdog narrative temporarily. Roman Reigns and Sheamus, that story, where, you know, because Vince McMahon was involved and the League of Nations was involved, people really got behind Roman for that short amount of time. You know, for that short amount of time, people were really behind. They forgot that they were supposed to hate Roman Reigns. They were like, oh, I like this guy because he's not Sheamus. He's not, you know, he's got to fight 4 guys and all that type of stuff. But, you know, once he overcame all of the odds, he went right back to, boo, this guy sucks. It's like, yeah, because, you know, we took away what made him interesting, which is, you know, overcoming the odds. You know, there is no more. That's what people say. Sometimes it's hard to feel sympathy for giants or big guys. You know, it was hard for WWE to create sympathy for Hulk Hogan because he's bigger than most of the opponents he had to wrestle. He only got to wrestle giants. Like, after he beat the Iron Sheik, it was essentially, okay, how can we keep finding new opponents for him to wrestle? It became bigger, more dangerous opponents. King Kong Bundy, Andre the Giant, and Sergeant Slaughter with the whole, you know, anti-America thing. But then he also had kind of a faction. Then, you know, you had Yokozuna, who was the big fat guy, and, you know, stuff like that. An Undertaker, you know, an undead zombie, you know, that kind of thing. You have to keep finding ways to make the character of Hulk Hogan an underdog, a guy. You have to keep him in danger. The underdog needs to stay in danger. And that's really what how Rey Mysterio works, is that because of his size, he almost always stays in peril. in every situation, you look like, oh man, it could really go bad for Ray. And he becomes, a perennial underdog, even despite the fact that he's won every major championship except the Universal title. But that's really all I got to say. Thank you guys for listening. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, and donate to the channel. Take the $1 challenge. Send me $1 via Cash App, if you please. Feel free to send more if you got it to spare. I'm going to start jingling my chain, so I'm going to put like a quarter in a cup and just start jingling it in a minute. If you got any ideas for videos, you want to contact me about something, send an email to mrslade84@gmail.com. That is Mr. Slade, one word, no period, 84, 8 and 4 @gmail.com. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being subscribed. Thank you guys for hitting the like button. And I'll talk to you guys later.